Welcome to the Programming Lines podcast, where these young patriots are on a mission to build more productive habits and mindset. Today, we've got a really cool guest in store for you. Philip Blackett has joined the show. He is an author, a consultant, an entrepreneur, previously worked at companies like FedEx, Goldman Sachs, Bank of America, and more. He holds a master's in divinity, an MBA from Harvard. His undergraduate is in political science and economics from University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. We get into a number of spicy topics today, including how to respectfully disagree, DEI, the recent Harrison Butker commencement speech. So you are not going to want to miss this. Let's go. Philip, thank you and welcome to the Programming Alliance podcast. We are so glad you could join us. You and I recently got connected, and I'm pumped to have you on the show. We got a number of topics we're going to explore. You've got a very diverse background, and it's really going to be great, I think, for our audience to get some of your expertise into the show. We got a lot of questions, but before that, maybe if you could take a couple minutes and just tell us a little bit in your own words about your background and journey.
Yeah, so Matt, Max, Will, happy to be here with you guys. Looking forward to a roaring good time, I should say.
Right.
So just I think real quick, the 1 minute hopefully version of me is basically born and raised in the South, Memphis, Tennessee, to be exact. Raised by my mom, primarily. Grandparents were helpful there too. Had a little sister, 22 months apart from me. Was raised off the sense that education is very important. I didn't really get that message until I was about 7th grade. I think I was just kind of fitting in just to fit in, even though I looked at things a lot differently from the rest of my classmates, which would later come off later on as far as me finding out that I'm on the autism spectrum. So I basically looked at things a lot differently from the rest of my classmates because I process things differently.
Right.
But anyways, really just had the huge emphasis on education and faith from my grandmother, grandfather, and my mom. My most important thing wasn't to fit in anymore. It was just I wanted to do best for my family, who stepped in when my father wasn't around actively. And I saw education doing the very best I could in the classroom as my way of giving thanks to them and showing that what the sacrifices they were making on a day-to-day basis was worth it. They didn't want me to necessarily take on a job. They said, hey, your job is to excel in the classroom. So basically, I went from like 7th grade, just trying to fit in, to like 8th grade being at the top of my class, valedictorian. And then later on, that just kind of hand over. It's just like, hey, like if I could really do well academically, let's see how far we can go with this. So I changed schools, went to a more academically tougher high school, very well known in the city, graduate top 10% of my class, got accepted into every college I applied to, which include like Ivy League, like Harvard, Princeton,
Wow.
Yale,
That's
all these
impressive.
different places. But I didn't go to any one of them because I accepted a full scholarship to the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, which some of you may know is a very famous university for a very
Indeed.
famous basketball player. I was just literally watching a documentary on, which is one of my favorites, called The Last Dance. From there, majored in political science and economics, so understand how the government works, how our economy works with regards to business, because somebody told me that if you knew how the government and economics work, you know how a country works. Now, if you add business and investments to that, you now know how the world works. And then when I later took on a seminary degree, I then found out, okay, now that you know how the world works by human standards, now let's learn how the world should work by God's standards. What was his original intent
Okay.
with that? So after college, I worked in New York City. I worked on Wall Street dealing with business and investments. I then worked at a couple other corporations, built businesses of my own. Later, went to Memphis for a little bit, came back to Boston, went to business school at Harvard. And then afterwards, I met my wife. And then we had twin girls that are now 7 years old. And now we're basically in our 8th year of marriage, raising these girls. And then in the midst of getting into that next chapter, parenthood and raising a family, being married. Now that you're 7, which Max, Will, you might remember around those times, you start to really remember things. You start to really, it's a really fun stage, which I'm living vicariously through your dad. Is like, okay, I can only imagine 10 years old, 12 years old, like This is like a fun stage to be kids and a fun stage to be a dad. So that's really where I'm at this point. While also working on my own business and have a few books that I've published and authored, and just going on this next stage of my life as I turn 40 later on in November.
All right.
Mhm.
That's a great summary, and we're going to unpack a number of those things as we get into the conversation here today. Before we get into some of those deeper topics, you consult with a lot of companies on a variety of areas, including artificial intelligence. And so the boys had a couple of questions around AI that they wanted to pick your brain on.
How might kids use AI productively?
It's a good question, Will. You kind of look at AI kind of the same where I grew up. My generation's AI was like the personal computer. Like it
Whoa.
was like dial up internet. There's once
Mhm.
upon a time that to get on the internet, you had to make sure no one was on the phone at the same time because we didn't have cell phones back then. So we had one house phone, and to get on the internet, had to use the same phone line. And that was like our AI because it's something new that we didn't know of beforehand. That was helpful for us to explore this thing called the internet, and for us as kids to learn about research, like for our classes, which beforehand, your dad and I likely had to go to the local library. We had
Yeah.
to
Right.
look up actual books in what they call a card catalog, where you had to like literally physically manually find these books and that sort.
Yeah, the Dewey
For us,
Decimal System.
yeah, to basically do our work. So now it's completely different with you all having AI, because now it's not like just with internet where like Google, you have things you can look up on the tip of your fingertips just in seconds. You now have generative AI that can actually do some of the work for you.
Yeah.
So it's like if I hadn't read a certain book yet, like Max, what's your favorite book right now?
Well, I like this graphic novel called Plants vs. Zombies.
So I probably have not read that, but I'm sure AI probably heard of it. So if you were to go to a certain generative AI tool and you say, "Hey, I'm reading this book here. I like to produce a book report. I'm having a tough time coming up with an outline for it. Can you help me out?" And just out of a matter of seconds, it starts spitting out what this
Yeah.
outline is. It basically, to answer your question, it's a huge aid for you to learn things that you can learn at any given time. Yeah, you can go to Google or you can go to AI and say, "Hey, teach me about the math equation you asked me about earlier."
Mhm.
Right? So basically, it just opens up a whole new realm to learn on your own beyond what the teacher can teach you in the classroom, which I think if you use it wisely and ethically, can be a significant boon to your development and growth as young men.
Do you think this will put more of an emphasis on critical thinking skills and problem solving versus memorization? What's your take on that?
Yeah, so I think now it's just you're going to be focused more on building the type of skills that AI can't necessarily duplicate for you. AI can't necessarily think for you, Will, on how you go about your math, your English class, or your history class, the American Revolution, or something like that. It can come up
Yeah.
with history, but as far as your personal take on it and whether something was right or wrong, that's going to involve like how you particularly think about it and how do you articulate that. So I think higher level skills that deal with how Max and Will critically think about things, how they analyze things, how they communicate that, those are things that can't necessarily be duplicated by AI. So
Right.
more the emphasis is developing those type of skills, and some of the other skills that might be lower level. Yeah, research for you is going to be a lot easier than it was for me and your dad.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever watched The Terminator or The Matrix?
Mm-hmm.
This is basically a potential reality. Do you think it's coming to real life?
Yeah,
Ooh.
science fiction, fiction being made up, but we're now approaching the time where that science fiction is now starting to become more science nonfiction, right? Like in the real world, real life. So you think about Terminator, for example. I remember watching that when I was your age. It scared the dickens out of me. Um, and just the thought of like a machine as big as Arnold Schwarzenegger that's going out there. Oh, that's so far fetched. That'll never happen.
Mhm.
Well,
It's coming soon.
Yeah, it's
We don't
like
want to have
thanks,
Waymos.
thank you goodness for that one. Same thing with Matrix to a certain degree. I also put in there Jurassic Park.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you think about Jurassic Park, it's like, okay, this was an attempt for man to bring back dinosaurs. For some reason, we said, hey, wouldn't it be cool if we can recreate these dinosaurs and put
Mhm.
them on land here and we can make a tourist attraction on there? Everything will go right. Nothing will go wrong. Well,
Are you sure about that?
exactly. If
Very,
you
very
saw the
stupid.
movie or movies, you saw anything unlike that. So it's the same sort of way to look at it with regards to AI or technology in general. What is your intent with it? And are you going to do good with it or are you going to do evil with it? That's what I'm more concerned about.
Right. AI is learning very quickly, boys.
Yes. Yes, exactly. Humans might just like not even work anymore. Robots will just do all the work, and then there might be like a robot takeover of humans. You never know.
One of the books that you've written, Philip, is Disagree Without Disrespect: How to Respectfully Debate Those Who Think, Behave, and Vote Differently Than You. What inspired you to write that?
So I think it's what I'm seeing right here on the show. It's family, right? I think that your relationships with your family is so important that you want to remove any sort of barrier for people to not be themselves around you. And so I think that happened with me. 4th of July last year, I had my sister come in to my house with her kids. I had my kids, my wife, her husband, my mom was here. And we had a discussion about a topic that, frankly, I don't even recall what it was. All I knew was my sister and I were on opposite sides of the spectrum.
Yeah.
And so as we were engaging this conversation that I saw, my mom stepped in and just said, oh, she was like a referee. She dropped the flag and said, nope, we're not going to get in this conversation. I asked why. And she said, it's 4th of July. I don't want to experience fireworks before the actual fireworks later on tonight.
Yeah, right.
And so the impact for me was this was a lost opportunity for me to share with my sister how I felt about something so she would better know me.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't about me trying to prove right or wrong necessarily. It was more so like there's something about me that you don't know about, and I want to share it with you because it's different from how you look at it.
Right.
If I was experiencing that within my own family, within people I love and I care about, how many other people may be hesitant or afraid to share about something that they're passionate about or they care about a lot that might be different from what other people feel that they might disagree with?
Yeah.
And how can we respectfully share those views and debate them if we want to and still keep the relationship between the people we talk to? And so I think that was a big framework with what brought the book to play.
It's like almost taboo to talk politics or current events anymore at holidays. And in some ways, it makes it boring because you just talk about things that aren't that interesting.
No, and that's the thing, Matt. Like, I'm not a big fan of small talk. I like to
Mhm.
talk about things that matter. I would love to see us have an environment where we can feel safe to share things with one another, that we don't get into name calling or putting people down. We may disagree with the idea, we may debate the idea and say we dislike it, but that doesn't mean I dislike you.
Right. Good advice.
Yep.
Wow.
So, how can people get more courage in expressing their views openly?
I think it gets down to just being able to express them. One of the things that's been helpful for me, my faith as a Christian, one of the things I lean on is the fact that Jesus walked the earth and he was controversial. If he wanted to preserve harmony, so to speak, or not ruffle any feathers or get anybody upset at him, he would not have fulfilled his purpose being here on earth. Each one of us has a purpose here that sometimes compels us to speak what's on our mind and speak what we believe is true. A good quote I've learned in particular was to avoid criticism, you should say nothing, do nothing, and be nothing.
Whoa.
It doesn't sound fulfilling.
Not at all.
Yeah.
Because ultimately, even if that's the case, you got no criticism, there's still something in your heart that's analyzing what you're doing, and you're having to have tough conversations with yourself, tough questions to answers like, why didn't I say something? Why didn't I do something? Now that my life has come and gone, would I have done things differently? It may influence or inspire others that are afraid to say something, people that are afraid to do something, to do it with you. And so you might be the catalyst for somebody else to be more authentic to themselves. So you might as well stick up for what you believe in and stand true to that, knowing that, hey, some people will agree with you and some people won't. And that's okay.
Wow.
Good advice.
That's
Good
deep.
advice. Speaking of criticisms and dealing with criticisms, you are pretty open about the fact that you have some conservative views and values. The Republican Party and your thoughts in terms of how they attract more Black, Hispanic voters into the party this year and beyond when there's so much at stake.
Here's what I would say. I think that we live in a world that's very selective as far as where we get our facts. When I think about with regards to the Republican Party, the Democratic Party, I'll say for sure, at least for African Americans, people that look like me, it seems like it's almost a given to assume that if someone looks like me, they automatically are going to vote Democrat.
Yeah. Even Joe said, if you don't vote for me, you ain't Black, something like that.
And think about that, like
Wild.
like think about how that sounds, right?
Yeah.
You know, it's
wild.
When people throw around the word racist, right? And you have to be really careful when you say something along those lines, because it's a very charged word to assume. But it's also someone saying that because I don't vote a certain way, I'm not a certain skin color now. Like, how is that loving? How is that hopeful? Because here's the thing: the assumption that you should vote a certain way just because you look a certain way, that's not kind. So to answer your question, I think a big part of what will have a lot of people that, whether they're Black or Hispanic, start to look beyond the Democrat Party to look at the Republican Party is, one, do I feel like there's a community there in the Republican Party that could feel accepted and included, right? Not just because I look a certain way, but it's like we share certain values, we share certain beliefs. We can get together that way. The second one is, can we trust people of the Republican Party? Because there's a sense that some people think that Republicans are racist. But I've also experienced, when you know your history, you also have to say, okay, the Democratic Party historically has not been the most anti-racist party in America. And I'll just put it that way. Okay. Regardless of how we look on the outside, we share a common denominator of certain values, certain beliefs, certain principles that we share. And that to me sounds a lot more beautiful, that we volunteer to be together because we share these common values, rather than feeling forced or pressured to do something because we all look a certain way. Right. And so that gets to like the third part, where basically it's like, do we have a sense that the policies or platforms that the Republican Party put out or advocate, are they good for white people? Are they also good for Black people? Are they good for people in Phoenix? Are they good for people in Boston? Are they good for people in the urban areas, or are they good for people in the rural areas? So more so, it's like, instead of judging on the color of one's skin, judge it on the merit of one's character, or the policies in place, or the values that you stand for, and let that rule the day.
Right.
And I think if you go off of that and say, hey, here's what we stand for, not just what we're against, but here's what we stand for. And that's something that people of all different shades can get around and say, hey, that makes sense. I agree with that. That's why I feel like a lot more people will be more open to going to the Republican side versus staying on the Democrat side.
Wow.
Well, yeah, that's really good stuff. And no doubt both parties have their problems. But is interesting to me because then I look at the policies, as you said, and while policies can be well intended, the outcomes aren't matching. And so I think if more people looked at the outcomes of the policies versus the intentions of the policies, what they'll find is some of the policies and ideas that the Republican Party has create longer term value structures, personal responsibility, accountability.
One of the reasons why I love sports so much is because it's as close to a meritocracy as you possibly can get.
Right.
Either you can play basketball or you can't.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't matter what you look like.
Mm-hmm.
That's not being mean. That's more so you just going off of the performance and the results and the merit. And that's where we should go back to and focus more of our attention when it comes to looking at policies and platforms and principles and values. What is it we're saying that we're believing in? And what are the results and outcomes? Because if you can show the results and outcomes that we're getting the job done, that we're helping people, we're helping families, we're helping communities, and we're helping them irregardless of color or what
Mm-hmm.
people look like, you're more likely to say, hey, I want what works for us too.
Right.
And if that means going to a different party and being around people that may not look like me, that's fine because I'm looking more so on the results.
Love that.
Wow.
So, do you get a lot of criticism and trolls for being a black conservative?
Not as much. Like I can probably count on half a hand right now, but I think that's only because a lot of people don't know that yet. I think this is kind of a recent thing for me to be more vocal, sharing what
Mhm.
I believe in, and people making a connection that that's not necessarily what I believe. And I'm kind of surprised you believe that, Philip. So I would anticipate to answer your question, no, not a lot of criticism, but that might not be the case later on. It's kind of hard for friends of mine that know me and that sort to criticize me publicly if I'm just sharing what I believe in and it's just, hey, this is what's important to me. This is how I look at it. And if you agree with it, great. If you disagree, that's okay too. The other
Yeah.
one is a lot of what I believe in is based on something bigger than me. It was based on the book that was here before everyone else that's currently alive was
Mm-hmm.
born, and that I believe will be here even after we pass on. And what is that book? It's the
The
Bible.
Bible.
And so when I bring the Bible into the conversation, when I bring God into the conversation, you have a different way of countering what I'm saying because it's not just me you're coming up against now. You're coming up against what God says. You had to be a pretty bold person to come against something that God had originally intended, that is
Yeah.
in His Word, that has passed on for generations before me, before your dad. We're talking like many, many generations before. And to me, that gives me confidence to say what I feel is needing to be said because it's not just me in the debate anymore.
Mm.
If it was just my
You got a strong
philosophy,
partner in that debate.
exactly. If it was just me, I woke up and say, hey, I decided I'm going to be against these people and these beliefs and that sort of thing. And that's what I believe. And that's how it is based on what I think. And that's it. It's a
Mm-hmm.
lot different than, hey, here's why I'm against this, though. And I'm for this. Because the way God created the world, this is what's his original intent. And I believe that he's not wrong. So,
Yeah.
what do you think
Yes.
based off of that? Is a different type of debate you're going to have, a different type of reactions. You can definitely be careful with criticism, but at least from my end, I haven't gotten much criticism for those two reasons.
Okay.
Okay. Our next question is very deep. It is, there are many, many fatherless homes in America and all over the world right now. Is this an epidemic?
I would say so. When you don't have the father in the home, when you have someone who's not connected to one's father as they grow up, you have an identity issue. Here's how I would frame it. Max, Will, how would your life be different if you didn't have your dad around?
That would be terrible. It would be like different, so different. Mostly of my life would be totally different.
Mm-hmm.
Like I want to go to CrossFit. We wouldn't have been this strong probably. Dad's like pretty like hard on us sometimes. I like that. No, I like Dad. I like that because like if we do something, it's hard. So then I get it, and I like that because it means we did something wrong. We got to think about what we do next time.
So the way I look at it, guys, is your dad is a parallel to how we are to look at our lives with our heavenly Father, right? God has trusted your dad and your mom with the responsibility and the joy of raising two beautiful sons, right? That's part of their responsibility and their stewardship, but it's also a representation of what God was like when he created the world, why he's our heavenly Father. Like, if you would imagine what would it be like to live in this world without a heavenly Father,
Oh.
I would think it'd be very similar to how you're describing how life would be without your earthly father here. So the type of men that Max and will become is a huge part influenced by how their dad's going to be in their lives. So it's almost in a sense like whatever you experience with your father, it carries over. And it carries over when Max and Will become adults and then they have families of their own. Because when you're fathers yourselves, you'll look back and say, hey, what was my dad like? How do I want to be with my kids? So now what happens is not just you, but now it becomes a generational thing. Whatever you experience, you're likely to pass on to your kids, and they're likely to pass on to their kids because they remember you. So whatever issues we have with fathers not being in the home and not being active, not present, not giving people that sense of unconditional love and that strong identity in who they are, that's likely to replicate itself over time in the next generation. And that's why I feel like it is an epidemic that is not being talked about enough and not coming up with solutions to help resolve it.
Yeah, it's really unfortunate. It's sad to me to think about how many families are fatherless or the father isn't present and how difficult that must be. When I look back, I was blessed to have two great parents. That's what really helped shape me, and I am forever grateful for that. But I know there's a lot of people who don't have that same opportunity. And so when I think about the privilege that I've had in life, that's the biggest one. I do think about being a father as a privilege and a duty, and I appreciate your words in terms of it passes on generationally, because these boys are going to take what they learned. They might tweak it a little bit, right? Probably make it better, and they're going to be great dads themselves someday.
Yeah, because I think part of the thing to think about too is that was part of God's design when he made the first family. When Adam and Eve had Cain and Abel, it wasn't just Eve who had Cain and Abel. It wasn't just Adam as a single father with Cain and Abel. It was Adam and Eve together. It was two parents, mother and father. So if that was part of the design from the get-go, why would we not want to replicate that as far as having more two-parent households to raise our kids? So we're not putting the burden overwhelmingly on the father or on the mother, which was the case for me when I was growing up.
Mm-hmm.
Like that was part of God's intent. So why would we not want to have that in our society today? Those two parent households, which, like you said, you see it as privilege. I also would say it's a blessing and it's part of what God wanted in the first place.
All right, so am I crazy or something? Or is society villainizing people, good people?
I think so. A lot of society is changing over generations, which I think has a part to deal with this whole fatherlessness part. I think also with social media. And the thought is if I can get enough people to spew negative comments on you, that changes the way people view you.
Yeah.
Oh, that many people are saying you're bad, then you must be bad.
Well, There's an interesting example that's happened recently, which is Harrison Butker's commencement speech at this college.
And Elon.
And I look at this, another great example would be Elon Musk and the things that he's done to try to protect free speech. And now he's a villain. But the most recent one is Harrison Butker with his commencement speech. And he talks about traditional families, the importance of a mother in a home, and how that was a choice that they made. And he is getting just raked over, and not a lot of people coming to his defense. And I think it's interesting because in the professional football realm, you have all kinds of degenerates, right? Having Tyreek Hill has, I think, 10 kids with 5 different women. And then
What?
nobody talks about,
That's
Max.
depressing.
True story, Max. Nobody talks about that. Nobody vilifies that. But then Harrison Butker comes out and talks about traditional values, fathers in the home, mothers having such an important role in society, more important than climbing the corporate ladder, and he just gets raked. I think it's the weirdest dynamic that is happening. I can't wrap my head around it.
I can. I watched all 20 minutes or so of the speech, and what came off in my mind was, one, you have a practicing Catholic speaking to a Catholic audience at a Catholic university, speaking about Catholic doctrine and what they believe. If we didn't have social media, guess what? We would have never heard of this.
Yeah.
We would have never commented on this because you had to be there to see it, right? So that's one. And so I think what happens here is that, when you have enough people that have an opposing worldview on this, that can be able to promote it and share their views on it as it being negative, it's almost like a bullying effect, right? Of villainizing good people, because he wasn't saying it necessarily for no other reason but to empower and to encourage his audience.
Right.
And what came off of my mind was, one, you had the NFL, or at least an officer in the diversity, equity, inclusion department talking about this. He doesn't speak our views, our values. Okay, that's fair. In response, tell me what your values are then.
Right.
If your values are different from what Harrison spoke about, I would love to hear, as a supporter of the NFL,
Wouldn't
to
you?
know what your values are and how you go about promoting those values to other people in light of some of the other degenerate behavior that we've witnessed from other players.
Right.
Right. So that's one. But then two, where are the other Catholics and Protestants? Where are the other Christians? Where are the people that believe in Jesus, that believe in the nuclear family, that believe in some of the things that Harrison talked about? Where are they? We're getting to a point here where it's almost like a tipping point. A lot of things have passed through the news and culture that people have gotten a pass on. Harrison's speech may be one of those highlights or milestones that some people are going to say, you know what? I was quiet about it, but enough's enough. I'm not going to just allow people to slander and villainize people that have similar viewpoints as I do.
Well, we need more of it. We need more people standing up. We talked about that earlier, having the courage to speak up about their beliefs. You've attended a couple of really great educational institutions, University of North Carolina, at Chapel Hill, grade school. Recently abandoned or stopped their DEI program.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm curious from your perspective if they got to the right answer.
So this is always a helpful topic that I think I'm fairly fresh on as well. This is a good example where I think people are starting to, if you want to call it wake up, let's do a performance review of what's transpired the past 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
If you remember, 4 years ago, 2020, there was a lot that was happening after the killing of George Floyd.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of protests across many cities across the country. And a lot came about it in terms of pressure for businesses to give money to organizations like Black Lives Matter. There was what some would say a mini industry that appeared, which was the DEI industry. Like all these positions started opening up where it wasn't enough to have a chief diversity officer. Now you had like DEI departments that people were now being employed to do. And they were doing all these different efforts to help make things better racially across the country, right? 4 years later, you don't see any Black Lives Matter protests, which is in and of itself, I guess people thought that Black Lives Matter, we've either they don't matter anymore or there's no need for us to do any more protests. We got what we wanted. So I don't see them out on the streets. But now it's a concern about anti-Semitism. So now it's like the topic has changed as far as like 4 years ago, we were talking about Black Lives Matter. Now it's Jewish lives. There's anti-Semitism growing. They matter. Let's talk about it. And then there's the opposing faction where it's like, well, what about Palestinians? Now this gets really tricky. It's like, okay, where do you side?
Right.
And two things come up top of mind for me out of this. One is when you had those protests and encampments on these college campuses, what was the net result out of that? Did you have universities that concede to your demands, basically give you what you're looking for? Or those that stand and say, you know what? I don't agree. We should not have students out here or non-students occupying campus buildings and campus grounds, disrupting our ultimate purpose as a university, which is to educate students that pay to be here.
Yeah.
This action that happened at UNC actually happened too shortly after there was defacement of public property on the campus. Once you get to the point where you're vandalizing property for the sake of what you're believing in and what your cause is, when you're breaking the law to prove a point, that's not helping your cause. That's actually reversing the trend. So I can see that being a factor. But then the second one is let's get back to a world where we're talking about performance and results. 4 years ago, we put all these different programs in place, these different people, personnel, these different initiatives, this money, this funding. What's happened 4 years since? Have we gotten any better? And that's, I think, what happened. A combination of those two that basically say, hey, look, we're going to take a different direction here. And it's going to be different from what we did 4 years ago.
I think that's an accurate take on how UNC got to their decision. You attended Harvard. I'm curious about how you think their reputation will stand up to this, because you've got this elite degree and everybody thinks of Harvard as the pinnacle of educational degrees, but they've taken a bit of a reputational hit over the last year. And I'm curious, as somebody who attended the school, how you feel about that.
It's interesting because I remember a few years ago, I used to talk to a bunch of alums from Harvard Business School, and I did a presentation, and I talked about one of the things I was concerned about, right? Once again, speaking your mind, sometimes at the threat of criticism, how Harvard has gone away from its origin. If you do history, if you look back in history, what was the purpose for Ivy League universities like Harvard, like Yale? What were they founded on?
I would just say to be a school. I don't know. I actually don't even know how on earth they got so popular. All I know is just they were some college that's been around for a while.
So it was actually like created to educate people in the Christian ministry.
Interesting.
Really?
There was a religious motivation as far as education. But we've gone far off from that.
Yeah.
And it's been more so the sense of like, okay, what's going to bring us the most money? What's going to bring us the highest endowment, the highest tuition, the highest fees, help propel us as this top-notch school in the country and around the world that everyone was wanting to be at. And now you have an issue where there's some people that take a certain stance against Harvard because of how they went about these campus protests. Maybe because they felt like they should have sided more with the Palestinian side, or they should have sided more with the Israeli side. Where some people saying, listen, regardless of side, they just mishandled the whole situation altogether. They didn't have that sense of strength. They didn't assert themselves to say, hey, look, this is a university. This is the way we're doing things. These are the ways you can go about it. We respect free speech, but within these guidelines. And if you
Right.
breach these guidelines, we will have to take action because we preserve our purpose of educating the people that are here.
Yeah.
So I think now it's just much more divided. I think it just depends on who you ask now. It's more
Yeah.
the eye of the beholder.
We have one more last question before rapid fire. So, division in the country is very, very high. Like, people do not like each other a lot right now, as we were talking. What are some things that parents or kids or fathers can do to create more unity for the next generation?
Yeah. So I think one thing I'll share what my mom taught me, which is part of what got the book Disagree Without Disrespect rolling. She taught me that, listen, just because I disagree with you, Philip, that does not mean that I don't love you. What would that mean to you if you knew that from your dad?
Very
Good
nice.
things.
Yeah.
It's great. It's good to know that the person that brought you into this world likes you.
That's part of the value of having a father like your dad. To your question, we have to serve as great examples for the people that we have responsibility over, that we have stewardship over. I can't change the world by myself. Listen, my name is Philip. My name is not Jesus. Okay.
Yeah.
So, what I say on top of that is my job is to be the best father and the best husband for my wife and twin daughters that I have in my house. If nothing else, that is the responsibility I have to excel at. I can't look outside of that. That is my top priority. Once you get past that, we can look as far as like your school, your community, your church, that sort of thing. But I got to take care of first things first. It's really doing the best you can with the role you've been given. And out of that, the goal is to serve as a great example that other people see from afar to say, hey, I appreciate how Max and Will carry themselves. And so by sharing that good example, by taking care of your responsibilities the right way, that I think is you'll grab people together. You'll show that unity and you'll show that sense of support where you can show a great example of what things should be like and how they were designed to be like in a good way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
So we'll
Nice.
keep our house in order and lead by example. That's a good place to start. I love that advice. And so now, without further ado, we're going to move into a less serious topic, Philip. This is fun. We have a session that we call Rapid Fire.
We're gonna start in 3, 2, 1. Excluding us, who is your idol?
Jesus.
Okay. Coolest invention in your lifetime?
Internet.
Would you rather fight a 1,000-pound duck or 1,001-pound ducks?
1,000-pound duck.
Okay. If you had a superpower, what would it be?
To teleport in a moment's notice. Anywhere I
Alright.
want to be.
Nice.
Have you ever been stuck in a bathroom stall without toilet paper?
Yes. And
Ooh, that's unfortunate.
Would you rather be a vegetarian or carnivore for the rest of your life?
carnivore.
Okay. And then
Would you rather die to a great white shark or flaming hot volcano?
Ooh. Great white shark. Just get it over with.
That concludes Rapid Fire. Amazing.
What are some final words for the GSD Nation?
Take a good sense of what we talked about. Find what resonates most with you. And don't just put it on the bookshelf to collect dust. Apply it in your life, whether individually or within your family or your community. Do not be afraid to be who God has made you to be, even if you get criticism, and just stand true to that and apply what we talked about today.
Philip, thanks again for coming on. Where can people go to learn more about you, your services, your channel?
I'm on social media, so you can find me on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, that sort of thing. Just look up Philip Blackett, spelled PHILIP BLACKETT. You can go to my website, philipblackett.com, or look up any of my books on Amazon just by looking up Philip Blackett.
Okay, perfect.
Alright.
And we're going to link that in the description or the show notes of the podcast so people can check it out. I feel like we've learned a lot today. Hopefully our audience took away a lot. And to your point, any morsels that they have that they can apply right away, put it to action, and let's get better together. So with that, we'll wrap it up. Thanks again, Philip, for coming on, and best of luck to you.
Thank you so much, everyone. Had a blast.
you.
Had a roaring good time with you guys. Thank you so much.
Nice. If you enjoyed this content, please subscribe, like, comment, share. It really makes a difference for us. Thank you. Until next time.